They shoved me in front of my granddaughter, then forced me to sign papers that would steal everything I'd worked for in 74 years of life. My own son Robert pushed me so hard I stumbled and nearly fell, while my 8-year-old granddaughter Lily watched in horror from the corner of my living room. "Sign it, old man!" my daughter-in-law Jessica screamed, waving legal documents in my face. "You're too senile to handle your own affairs anyway. If you've ever been physically attacked by your own family, if you know what it feels like to have someone try to steal your home while a child watches in terror, if you've ever been forced to choose between your safety and your dignity, while the people you love most become your worst enemies, pull up that chair and hold on tight. Because this story's gonna show you that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who call you family, and sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. I'm William Thompson, 74 years old, been living in Memphis, Tennessee my whole life, except for the 2 years I spent in Vietnam fighting for this country. Came home in 1970 with a Purple Heart, married my sweetheart Margaret, and spent the next 50 years building a life worth protecting. Worked at FedEx for 35 years, bought a house in a decent neighborhood, raised my son Robert to be a man of integrity and honor. Or at least I thought I did. Margaret passed 2 years ago from lung cancer, and losing her nearly broke me in half. But I kept going because that's what Marines do. We adapt, we overcome, we never surrender. My house on Elm Street became my fortress of memories, filled with pictures of Margaret, mementos from my military service, and 50 years worth of life lived with purpose and dignity. That's when Robert and Jessica started their campaign to help me manage my affairs. They'd come over for dinner and make comments about how big the house was for one person, how difficult it must be to maintain, how much money I was wasting on property taxes and utilities. Jessica would walk through my rooms like she was already measuring for new furniture, asking invasive questions about my finances and medical care. The warning signs were all there, but I ignored them because Robert was my son, my blood, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle and throw a football. I figured he was just worried about his old man, maybe a little anxious about inheritance and future security. I never imagined that my own child would physically assault me in front of his daughter, would traumatize an innocent little girl to steal money from her grandfather. That afternoon when they visited with Lily was supposed to be a normal Sunday family dinner. Instead, it became the day I learned that some people will do anything for money, even destroy their own children's innocence and their father's dignity. But what Robert and Jessica didn't know was that their greed was about to backfire in ways they never imagined, and that little Lily's presence during their assault would become the key to their downfall. And if you're wondering how getting pushed around and forced to sign papers led to me not only keeping everything I owned, but getting a court judgment that made my attackers pay me damages for the rest of their lives, well, hit that subscribe button on Grandpa's Diaries. Because this story's about to show you that sometimes the people who think you're weak and helpless are about to learn that a United States Marine never really retires from the fight, and sometimes the most innocent witness can deliver the most powerful testimony. Robert used to be my pride and joy, the son who was going to carry on the Thompson family name with honor and integrity. When he was little, he'd sit on my lap while I told him stories about serving in Vietnam, about the importance of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, about standing up for what's right even when it's hard. "Daddy," he'd say in that sweet little voice, "when I grow up, I'm gonna be a hero like you." I remember teaching him to change a tire when he was 16, showing him how to use tools properly, explaining that a man takes care of his responsibilities and looks after his family. "Son," I told him, "your word is your bond, and your family is your foundation. You protect both of those things with your life because without them, you're nothing." Robert seemed to understand those lessons back then. He was a good student, stayed out of trouble, enlisted in the Army Reserves after high school like he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. When he married Jessica, I was happy for him. Thought he'd found a partner who would help him build something meaningful. Margaret and I welcomed Jessica into our family, included her in holiday celebrations, treated her like the daughter we'd never had. But Jessica changed Robert, slowly and systematically, like water wearing away stone. She came from a family that measured success in dollars rather than character, and she never understood why Robert was content with his supervisor job at the manufacturing plant instead of chasing bigger money and fancier titles. "Your father has all that equity just sitting there," she'd tell Robert when she thought I couldn't hear. Meanwhile, we're struggling to pay for Lily's activities and save for her college. The real problem started after Margaret died, and Robert inherited her life insurance policy. A modest $25,000 that was supposed to help with funeral expenses and transition costs. Instead of being grateful for what his mother had left him, Jessica used that inheritance as proof that I was hoarding wealth, while my family struggled financially. Dad's sitting on a house worth $180,000, plus his military pension and Social Security, she'd say during their kitchen table conversations that I wasn't supposed to overhear. Meanwhile, Lily needs braces, we need a new car, and we're barely keeping up with our mortgage payments. It's selfish for him to keep all that money tied up in assets he doesn't really need. Robert started parroting Jessica's talking points during our conversations, asking me about my estate planning and whether I'd considered liquidating non-essential assets to help with family expenses. The language was getting more sophisticated, more manipulative, like they'd been researching elder law and financial exploitation strategies. The most heartbreaking part was watching how they used Lily as a weapon in their campaign. They'd bring her over for visits and have her ask innocent questions about why Grandpa lived in such a big house all by himself, why he didn't want to move somewhere smaller so he could help pay for her dance lessons and school supplies. An 8-year-old child being coached to guilt-trip her grandfather into giving up his financial security. It was disgusting, but I didn't fully understand how calculated it was until that terrible Sunday afternoon. The setup became obvious about 3 months before the attack, when Robert started bringing different people to our family dinners. A financial planner who specialized in senior financial transitions, a real estate agent who had ideas about downsizing options, and a lawyer who claimed to be an expert in elder care planning. Each of these strangers would spend dinner asking me invasive questions about my finances, my health, and my plans for the future. "Mr. Thompson," the financial planner said over Margaret's meatloaf recipe that I'd finally learned to cook myself. "Many seniors find that their housing costs consume too much of their fixed income. Have you considered the benefits of liquidating your home equity to create a more liquid investment portfolio?" I listened politely while this man explained various schemes for separating me from my property: reverse mortgages, sale-leaseback arrangements, and family partnership structures that would give Robert legal control over my assets, while allowing me to remain in the house as a tenant. Every suggestion was wrapped in concern for my financial security, but underneath all the professional language, they were describing ways to steal my home. "Gentlemen," I said, setting down my fork and looking each of them in the eye, "I appreciate your concern, but I didn't survive 2 tours in Vietnam and 35 years at FedEx to give up my independence at 74. This house is paid for, my bills are current, and my affairs are in order. I don't need help managing what I've spent a lifetime building." The silence around that dinner table was deafening. Robert looked embarrassed, Jessica looked angry, and their professional advisors looked like they'd just lost a commission. But I could see the wheels turning in Jessica's head, calculating her next move, planning a different approach to the same goal. After the guests left, Robert tried to convince me that I was being stubborn and unrealistic about my situation. "Dad, you're 74 years old. What happens if you fall down the stairs? What happens if you have a medical emergency and can't take care of yourself? We're just trying to plan ahead." "Son," I replied, "I've been taking care of myself since before you were born. When that time comes that I can't, I'll make appropriate arrangements. But that time isn't now, and those arrangements aren't yours to make." I should have recognized that conversation as the moment Robert chose Jessica's greed over his father's dignity. But I still believed that blood was thicker than money, that the boy I'd raised would never seriously consider hurting his own father for financial gain. I was wrong about that, dangerously wrong, and my naivety almost cost me everything. The phone calls started a few weeks later, Robert checking on me multiple times a day, asking about my activities, my health, my ability to handle complex tasks like paying bills and managing appointments. "Dad, I'm worried about you living alone," he'd say. Maybe we should set up some kind of check-in system or have someone come by regularly to help with household management. What he was really doing was building a case for my incompetency, documenting examples of confusion or forgetfulness that could be used later to justify taking control of my affairs. Every conversation became an evaluation. Every interaction became evidence in a legal case I didn't know was being prepared against me. The trap was closing, and I was walking right into it because I trusted my son to have my best interests at heart. I trusted him the way fathers trust their children, the way Marines trust their brothers in arms, the way good people trust their families to protect them rather than prey on them. That trust was about to be betrayed in the most violent and humiliating way possible. The assault happened on a Sunday afternoon in October, during what I thought was going to be a normal family visit. Robert, Jessica, and Lily came over for dinner, and everything seemed pleasant enough at first. Lily helped me set the table. Robert watched football in the living room, and Jessica seemed unusually helpful in the kitchen, almost friendly for the first time in months. But after dinner, when Lily was playing with her dolls in the corner of the living room, Robert and Jessica's demeanor changed completely. Robert pulled out a briefcase I hadn't noticed him bring in, filled with legal documents, and Jessica positioned herself between me and the front door like she was blocking my escape route. "Dad," Robert said, his voice suddenly cold and businesslike, "we need to have a serious conversation about your living situation. Jessica and I have been consulting with legal and financial experts, and we all agree that you can't continue living alone in this house." He spread the documents across my coffee table. Power of attorney forms, property transfer deeds, financial management agreements, everything they needed to take complete control of my life and assets. "These papers will ensure that your needs are taken care of while protecting your financial interests," he continued, but his tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "I'm not signing anything," I said, standing up from my recliner and backing away from the table. "I told you before, I don't need help managing my affairs, and I don't want strangers controlling my property." That's when Jessica exploded. "You stubborn old fool," she screamed, her mask of fake concern completely gone. "You're too senile to understand what's best for you. We're trying to help you, and you're too proud and too stupid to accept it." Robert grabbed me by the shoulders, his hands rough and violent in a way I'd never experienced from my own son. "Dad, you're gonna sign these papers right now, or we're gonna have you declared incompetent and take everything anyway. At least this way, you get to keep some dignity." I tried to pull away from him, but at 74, I wasn't as strong as I used to be, and Robert was a big man who worked with his hands. He shoved me backward, hard enough that I stumbled and nearly fell over the coffee table, catching myself just before I hit the floor. "Grandpa!" Lily screamed from the corner, dropping her dolls and starting to cry. "Daddy, why are you hurting Grandpa?" That's when I realized the full horror of what was happening. Not only were Robert and Jessica willing to physically assault me to steal my property, but they were doing it in front of an 8-year-old child, traumatizing their own daughter to accomplish their goals. Lily was watching her father attack her grandfather, learning that violence and greed were acceptable tools for getting what you wanted. "Sign the papers, old man," Jessica demanded, picking up a pen and shoving it at me while Robert held my arms. "You're gonna do this the easy way or the hard way, but you're gonna do it." I signed those documents because I was afraid of more violence, afraid of what they might do to me if I continued to resist, afraid that little Lily was going to be further traumatized by watching her parents brutalize her grandfather. My hands were shaking as I wrote my name, and tears were streaming down my face, but I signed everything they put in front of me while my granddaughter sobbed in the corner. But even as I was signing away my independence and my security, even as I was being robbed by my own family, I was making a promise to myself and to Margaret's memory. This wasn't over. These people had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. After Robert and Jessica left with their illegally obtained documents, I sat in my living room for hours, staring at the coffee table where I'd been forced to sign away my life's work. The house felt different now, violated, like strangers had broken in and stolen something that could never be replaced. But more than my property had been taken, my trust, my sense of safety, My belief that family meant protection rather than predation. The image that haunted me most was Lily's face during the assault, the confusion and terror in her 8-year-old eyes as she watched her father physically attack her grandfather. That little girl had been forced to witness something no child should ever see, and the trauma of that experience was going to stay with her forever. Robert and Jessica hadn't just stolen from me. They'd stolen their daughter's innocence. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in Margaret's old chair holding her picture and planned my counterattack. 22 months in Vietnam had taught me that sometimes the enemy reveals their position too early, gives you intelligence you can use against them later. Robert and Jessica thought they'd won, but their victory celebration was premature. The next morning, I called Sarah Mitchell, an attorney who specialized in elder law and financial abuse cases. I'd found her name in the phone book under Elder Abuse Legal Services, and when I explained what had happened, she agreed to see me immediately. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said after reviewing the documents I'd been forced to sign, "this is one of the clearest cases of elder abuse and coercion I've ever seen. These signatures were obtained through physical violence and intimidation, which makes every document invalid. More importantly, the fact that they committed these crimes in front of a child gives us additional legal leverage. We spent 2 hours that first day documenting everything that had happened, and Sarah explained my options. I could file criminal charges for assault and elder abuse, civil lawsuits for fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and petitions to have all the coerced documents declared void and unenforceable. The key to this case, Sarah explained, is going to be your granddaughter's testimony. An 8-year-old child has no reason to lie about what she witnessed, and juries are particularly responsive to cases where children have been traumatized by adult greed and violence. I struggled with the decision to involve Lily in the legal proceedings. She was just a baby, and she'd already been through enough trauma because of her parents' actions. But Sarah convinced me that Lily's testimony might be the only way to ensure that Robert and Jessica faced real consequences for what they'd done. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "if you don't stop them now, they'll do this again. Maybe not to you, but to other elderly family members, other vulnerable people who can't fight back. Your granddaughter's testimony could prevent other children from witnessing the same kind of abuse she experienced." We filed the legal papers the next week, criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, and emergency injunctions to prevent Robert and Jessica from using any of the documents they'd coerced me into signing. The sheriff served them with papers at their house, and according to the process server, Jessica screamed that I was a vindictive old man who couldn't accept help from people who loved him. Love. That's what she called physical assault and financial theft. That's what she called traumatizing an 8-year-old child to steal money from her grandfather. If that was Jessica's definition of love, then I was grateful to be hated. The wheels of justice moved slowly, but they were moving in my favor. Robert and Jessica had made their biggest mistake when they assumed that my age made me helpless, that my grief over losing Margaret had made me weak. They were about to learn that a United States Marine doesn't surrender his position without a fight, and that sometimes the people you underestimate are the most dangerous enemies you'll ever face. The trial took place 6 months later, and the courtroom was packed with people who'd heard about the case through news coverage and community word of mouth. Elder abuse cases don't usually generate much public interest, but something about a Vietnam veteran being assaulted by his own son had captured people's attention and anger. Judge Michael Davis, a distinguished African-American man in his 60s who'd served in the Army himself, presided over the proceedings with obvious disgust for what Robert and Jessica had done. He'd reviewed all the evidence beforehand, including the police reports, medical evaluations, and psychological assessments of the trauma inflicted on Lily. "This court has rarely seen such a clear case of elder abuse motivated by pure greed," Judge Davis said during his opening remarks. "We will be examining not only the financial crimes committed against Mr. Thompson, but the violence inflicted upon him and the psychological trauma inflicted upon an innocent child." Robert and Jessica had hired an expensive lawyer from downtown Memphis, a smooth-talking man who tried to portray the whole incident as a family misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by an elderly man who was confused about his own best interests. Their strategy was to paint me as a stubborn, possibly senile old man who had misinterpreted his family's legitimate concern for his welfare. But their strategy collapsed the moment Lily took the witness stand. Sarah had prepared her carefully, explaining that she needed to tell the truth about what she'd seen. That her grandfather needed her help to make sure the bad things didn't happen again. "Lily," Sarah said gently, "can you tell the court what you saw happen in your grandfather's living room that Sunday afternoon?" "Daddy pushed Grandpa really hard," Lily said, her voice small but clear. "Grandpa almost fell down and he was crying. Mommy was yelling at him and being really mean. She called him stupid and she made him write his name on papers even though he didn't want to." The courtroom was completely silent, except for the sound of Lily's testimony and the occasional sniffle from jurors who were wiping their eyes. This little girl was describing a scene of domestic violence with the clarity and honesty that only children possess, and every word was devastating to her parents' case. "Were you scared?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Lily replied. "I thought Daddy was going to hurt Grandpa more. I thought maybe Grandpa was going to have to go to the hospital like when Grandma got sick." Robert's lawyer tried to cross-examine Lily, but Judge Davis shut that down immediately. "Counselor," he said, "this court will not permit the intimidation of a child witness who has already been traumatized by your client's actions. If you have questions for this witness, you will submit them in writing for the court's review." The rest of the trial was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The coerced signatures, the medical documentation of my injuries from being shoved, the psychological evaluation showing the trauma inflicted on Lily. Expert witnesses testified about elder abuse patterns, financial exploitation schemes, and the long-term effects of domestic violence on children. When Judge Davis delivered his verdict, his voice was filled with righteous anger. "Robert and Jessica Thompson, you have committed crimes that shock the conscience of this court and this community. You physically assaulted a 74-year-old veteran. You traumatized your own child, and you attempted to steal the life savings of a man who spent his adult life serving his country and his family. The punishment was swift and comprehensive. All the documents I'd been forced to sign were declared null and void. Robert and Jessica were ordered to pay $200,000 in damages for assault, elder abuse, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were banned from contact with me and prohibited from inheriting any portion of my estate. Most importantly, the court ordered supervised visitation only for Lily, ensuring that she would be protected from further exposure to her parents' criminal behavior. 3 years have passed since that courtroom victory, and my life has found a peace and purpose I didn't think was possible after losing Margaret. The house on Elm Street is still my fortress, but now it's protected by court orders and legal precedents that ensure no one can ever again use violence or coercion to steal what I've worked for. Robert and Jessica have been making their court-ordered payments on schedule, probably because they know that any default would result in additional criminal charges and jail time. The $200,000 judgment has been funding home improvements, veteran support charities, and a college fund for Lily that her parents can't touch until she turns 18. Lily visits me every other Saturday under court supervision, and slowly but surely, she's healing from the trauma her parents inflicted on both of us. We work in Margaret's garden together, read books on the front porch, and talk about school and friends and dreams for the future. She's a smart, resilient little girl who's learning that not all adults are violent and greedy, that her grandfather's house is a safe place where she's loved and protected. "Grandpa," she asked me last weekend while we were planting flowers in Margaret's memorial garden, "why did Mommy and Daddy try to hurt you?" It's a question I've been dreading and preparing for, because how do you explain to a child that some people choose money over love, greed over family, violence over patience? "Sometimes, baby girl," I told her, "people get confused about what's really important in life. They think having more money will make them happy, so they do bad things to try to get it. But real happiness comes from loving people and being kind to them." The legal victory was satisfying, but the real victory is seeing Lily smile again, watching her trust that she's safe in my house, knowing that she's learning the difference between right and wrong from someone who actually understands the difference. Her parents tried to use her as a weapon against me, but instead she became my salvation, the witness whose innocent testimony delivered justice when justice seemed impossible. I learned something important during those months of legal battles and family destruction. Sometimes the people who think you're weak because of your age are about to discover that wisdom and experience are more powerful than youth and greed. Robert and Jessica thought my 74 years made me an easy target, someone who could be physically intimidated into giving up everything I'd earned. Instead, those years had given me the knowledge to recognize their scheme, the connections to fight back effectively, and the determination to protect not just my assets, but my granddaughter's future. My will has been updated to reflect everything that happened. Lily will inherit my house and savings when she turns 25, old enough to understand their value and protect them from people who might try to take advantage of her. Until then, the estate is managed by a trust that ensures she gets the education and opportunities her parents' greed almost stole from her. The neighborhood is peaceful now, filled with the sounds of children playing and families living normal lives rather than the echoes of domestic violence and elder abuse. My neighbors, especially Mrs. Rosa Jenkins, who heard the commotion that terrible Sunday afternoon, check on me regularly and have become an extended family that actually understands what family means. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been physically attacked by family members who thought your age made you vulnerable? Have you ever had to choose between your safety and your dignity when people you trusted turned violent? Have you ever discovered that sometimes the most innocent witness can deliver the most powerful testimony for justice? And if this story reminded you that age brings wisdom and legal rights rather than weakness and vulnerability, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. I've got more stories about fighting back when people underestimate you, about protecting the innocent from the greedy, and about learning that sometimes the courtroom is the only place where truth and justice can overcome violence and greed. A Marine's duty to protect never ends, whether you're fighting in Vietnam or fighting in your own living room, and sometimes the most important battle is the one you fight for the next generation. I'll see you next week with another cup of coffee and another lesson about never surrendering to people who think they can take what's yours through fear and violence.